This is David Patrick. He was a Vietnam vet, and he has some artifacts and somewhat souvenirs that he wants to show. Okay.
Alright.
Get this out. Okay. You can explain what this is.
Okay, that's a tail fin assembly off an 82 millimeter mortar. A mortar is a muzzle-fed, high angle of trajectory weapon. That one fired maximum range about 4,000 meters. That was picked up on the battlefield at Jolin, close to the DMZ. That and this piece of shrapnel. We were hit with almost, hold it like this. We were hit with over 1,000 rounds of heavy artillery. We were in the first artillery attack of North Vietnam. And there's not a piece on that that's not sharp and cutting somewhere. Each round weighed about 100 pounds to 120 pounds, and 1,000 rounds of it in an area not much bigger than this school complex. So we were lucky that we didn't have any more people injured than we did. This picture here, this is the crater that it made. And this is the actual picture of the artifact picked up on the battlefield of circa March 1967. That would be 51 years ago, and she's holding the proof.
All right. Anything else? Anything else you want
Okay,
to say?
this was my weapons platoon, Indian Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, circa November, December 1966. Weapons platoon consisted of 6 machine guns, 3 mortar tubes, 2 3.5 anti-tank rocket launchers. This is a newspaper clipping of the artillery attack that someone sent from back home. This was referred to as Back in the World. They sent it to us because we were in Timbuktu, and we were amazed at the write-up that appeared in an American newspaper.
Okay. All right. We'll start the questions. I have questions right here.
Okay.
What is your last name and spell it?
Patrick, P-A-T-R-I-C-K.
First name,
David,
middle initial.
L.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1946.
Where did you live before you became part of the military?
I lived in Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
What branch of service were you part of?
The United States Marine Corps.
How did you get in the service? Did you volunteer or
I
were you
did.
drafted?
I did. I volunteered. I was in college in Temple Terrace, Florida, at a church-affiliated school, and I felt like I had seen it on TV, and I felt like that it was my duty to go assist my country.
When did you first start in the service?
I enlisted in March 1966.
Where were you in basic?
I went to basic in scenic San Diego, California, Camp Pendleton.
Where were you sent after basic training?
Beg your pardon?
Where were you sent after basic training?
Well, after basic, we got a 30-day leave because we were going to Vietnam. And when you ship out like that, they give you get 30 days a year. And so we used up all that 30 days and came back to Camp Pendleton out there. And we went through 3 weeks of staging, which was preparation to go to Vietnam. It was all the infantry tactics. They gave you lectures on things to do and not to do, things to look out for, and just general knowledge.
What was your job when you began military service?
You mean in civilian life or military?
Both.
Okay, in civilian life, I had worked for Safeway Food Stores. I'd worked at an international paper company as a utility clerk. I went to school, and then I dropped out and joined the Marine Corps. My job in the Marine Corps, every Marine is trained to be an infantryman first, a basic rifleman, and everything else is secondary, whether you're communications, artillery, whatever. You're always a rifleman first. And when I started, my first assignment was 0331, a machine gunner. I went to machine gun school and finished it, and then we shipped, well, then I had to leave, and then we shipped out to Vietnam.
What was happening in the world when you were in the military?
I don't know. We were isolated.
How long did you serve in the military?
2 years.
What was the reason for you to get out?
My enlistment was up.
When you served in the time of war, what engagements can you remember?
Well, when I first got there, they had us in the rear area for about a week getting acclimated, and then they shipped us out on helicopters to, they were on an operation. The contact was in the hills of Vietnam, just south of the DMZ, on an operation called Operation Prairie. It was Prairie 1. I got there on a real hot afternoon, and we were carrying a case of grenades and water cans, 5-gallon water cans, up and down the hills to get to where they were. Everything in Vietnam, you traveled in a column, and when the point men made contact with the enemy, then the rest of the column proceeded to fill out around it and proceed to attack. And when I got off the chopper, it reminded me of a World War I battlefield that was broken trees and dirt and craters and timber, and just devastation like you see on the film reels of World War I, the barren battlefield. And then we humped down this ridge line, and there was this dead Vietnamese there that they had part of his arm sticking up, giving the universal greeting. And they said, "Hey, we got one over here." And that was my first introduction to a dead enemy body.
What do you remember most about your time in the service?
Well, that's hard to say. There were periods of intense excitement and hours of boredom, but you were always tired. We hardly had enough water to drink, much less bathe. I went 30 days one time with no shave, no shower, no change of clothes, and just barely had enough water to drink. We went one day, 3 days and 2 nights with no water and no chow. And like I say, we went out on the first operation. We came back off of it, and we set up at Camp Carroll, which was an artillery base, and they were firing all hours of the night and day. And we gathered ourselves up a little bit because the operation was pretty tough. And then we moved down the road about 5 miles and built a fire base called Cam Low. And it was, when we started, it was low rolling hills with just sagebrush and bushes on it. We cleared it out. They set up artillery, and we always set a circular perimeter around the encampment. And you had fighting positions like every 10 meters all the way around it. And you'd fire support for whoever was on an operation. Everything there was operation sweeps. You had ambushes at night and sweeps during the daytime. Usually it was squad or company size, and it was always something going on. Excuse me. I've had indigestion ever since I got out, because the whole time that I was there, all we had to eat was sea rations. There are 12 delicious flavors, and they got old pretty quick, but we were glad to have them. You go a couple days without them, you're really glad to have them.
Yeah.
And my stomach's been messed up ever since.
What qualities do you believe you carried from the military to where you are today?
How to survive.
Yeah.
Teamwork, appreciation of some of your fellow men. I realized when I got home that we subsisted on the most basic of supplies, availability. We had, all you had was what you carried on your back, and that wasn't much. I had a poncho, an extra pair of socks, a few cans of sea rations, a flak jacket, a helmet, 3 canteens of water, 4 magazines, my rifle, and all the mortar ammunition I could put on packboard. And when it gets right down to it, the things that I appreciated most are something everybody takes for granted. And that would be a dry place to sleep and all the water I wanted to drink. It didn't even have to be cold, just enough water to drink. That's life's basic needs. We slept in a wrapped up poncho. It was hot, 6 months of it was hot and dry, and 6 months of it was cold and wet. The rain started, monsoon rain started about early October, and they quit about last of February, and it rained every day. First time we were at Conti Inn, it rained all day, every day. We were there 21 days, it rained 19 days in a row. And we had one cloud that rained on us 4 different directions. We saw it coming, it rained on us this way, went down here, circled around, came back this way, came back this way, and came back this way. 4 different directions from one cloud. And it was tough being wet and 55 degrees. When the column stopped, you're standing there with your clothes away from you as much as possible. And then when the column starts to move, that cold, wet cloth slaps up against you. Pretty tough.
Very. Alright, what are your most enduring memories of your time in the service?
Oh, it's hard to classify a few. Intense fear, trauma at losing people that were close to you, being this close to death so many times that you can't even imagine. I've got 7 days left in the field before I rotate home. During the tour, you do your 13-month tour and you rotate out. That's your time in service. 7 days before I rotated back, we were attacked by 140 millimeter rockets out of the Central Highlands, and we were set up around the fire base, and we had just built a brand new 4-hole outhouse out of ammunition crates. And this one of the rounds they fired struck the artillery base behind us. One of them hit the outhouse dead center, and I look up out of my hole, and there's pieces of wood flying through the air like rain.
Do you ever get back together with the people you served with?
I did one time. We had a battalion reunion in San Diego in 1997, and it was good. There was only like 3 people there that I had been with and served and remembered. And we had this one guy, old timers is killing me. I can't remember his name.
That's okay.
But he had, they were on that first Operation Prairie, pushing down this ridge line, fighting. The enemy would be in bunkers in great camouflage. You couldn't see it until you were right on top of it. And they were calling in artillery fire ahead of them. And one of the rounds landed short, and this guy lost an arm and 1 leg from this explosion. And my squad leader said, "Corpsman up," that's what you call for the medic. And he said, "I thought he was dead." I can't remember his name. Anyway, I saw him at San Diego, and he was signing in, and he wrote his name across there, and let's just say his name was Roy Geller. That wasn't it, but let's just say it was Roy Geller. And he writes down, and I said, "Roy Geller," I said, "Damn, man, I thought you were dead." He said, "Yeah, so did a lot of other people." And to show you the sick humor that the Marines have when we're walking down the hallway going out of the hospitality room, he's got 1 leg, and when you call cadence when you're marching, your left, left, right?
Yeah.
Okay? They said, "You're right, you're right, you're right," because that's all he had.
Yeah.
He was walking on crutches. And good-natured, good humor. He retired from the Internal Revenue Service in Kansas City. But I thought that was poetic. Hey man, I thought you were dead. He said, yeah, so did a lot of other people, but he made it, and lived a normal life. I was at a rifle match in Little Rock one time, competitive rifle shooting, and there was this cop there from Monroe, Louisiana, which is 100 miles from Little Rock. And I asked him, I said, hey, you don't happen to know Richard Medeiros, do you? He said, well, yes, I do. He's one of our fellow cops. I said, really? I was in Vietnam with him. He said, yeah, he's with our department. So I went ahead and got a hold of him, and I guess it was 10 or 15 years later. He was coming through our area, and no, I take that back. I went down there. I went to Monroe, Louisiana to see him, and visited with him, and I've got some pictures of him in here. And he was the same old Medeiros that he's retired from the Shreveport, Louisiana. Monroe, Louisiana Police Department now. But it was great to see him again. There was one of the guys that I was with was over at Wright City with a moving company, and he had a heart attack and died before I got to see him. And this one guy here, that's Sergeant, our platoon sergeant, and I got a hold of him, and he came down and saw us, visited with me one time. Mark Cunningham. He was a little wound tight. He worked 35 years for Chrysler Motor Corporation, retired, and never got married. He was wounded a couple times, and he took care of us pretty well because he was our platoon sergeant. And it was great to see him, and wish him the very best of everything he does. I don't know how he kept from getting married, but he never did get married. And he said, I asked him, I said, well, what do you do? He said, well, I got a few bucks in the bank.
Yeah.
He was a machinist for Chrysler and made big money. They had at one time, they had mandatory 12-hour overtime, and you couldn't turn it down. And he lived about 5 minutes from where he worked, and just made money and put it in the bank. When Chrysler went belly up, he said he lost $500,000 of stock. So that's what he did with his money.
Oh my gosh. All right, that's all of the questions I have. What else do you want to say?
Well, what do you want to know?
That's up to you.
Do you want to hear my 3-phrase summary of Vietnam?
Sure.
The basic summary. Coffee was cold, beer was hot, toilet paper was wet.
Yeah.
And you had to be able to laugh at some of the things that happened. I've seen a lot of people that never talked about their service, their duty, and basically they were wound so tight that it just ate them up. They were just a mental basket case, people that just exploded. Some guys, are so serious that they carry it to their grave. And I always had the philosophy that I could talk to another military veteran that had been in combat and tell stories and things like that you wouldn't tell somebody else. Like I wouldn't relate it to you. Number one, and I don't mean to be unkind, is you don't deserve to know. If you hadn't ridden the elephant and seen the bear, you don't deserve to hear the stories.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I know.
Sometimes I tell some of the lighter type of stories, but when even a guy in the Army that was in the thick of things, you had more in common with them than you did somebody from your own service that was in supply or a clerical duty or never left stateside. And it's funny how things will affect you, and you feel a certain kindredship because you've both suffered the same kind of environment.
What makes you want to do this? Why are you?
Why am I here?
Yes.
Number one, because you asked me. And number two, I don't mind showing some people some things and relating some of my experiences to you. It was something that a lot of people. Okay, think about this. In 1967, there was, I think, 450,000 troops in Vietnam. you only had 81 battalions in the field beating the bushes looking for the enemy. Everybody else was in supply, support, Air Force, the Navy, logistics. So we were a very minor fraction of the entire military that were out there beating the bushes, taking the chances, getting killed, enduring the hardships, and with basically nothing. We did more with less than anybody in history. Because, like I said, what you had on your back, you had ponchos and sea rations and 3 canteens of water. When we had a guy that got hit, and they call in medevac choppers, and people are over there trying to load him up, and you're ripping all his gear off of him because you could use an extra canteen, or you could use an extra magazine, or you could use, and he'd be hollering, "No, not my gear, not my gear," and they're ripping it off like locusts on a dead carcass. Because he's going to the rear, and they'll have to reissue him all new stuff before he comes back. He didn't need it, and we did.
Yeah. What are some of your special duties highlights or achievements?
Well, number one achievements, I got home alive. Special duties, I started out carrying machine gun ammo, and then they came by one day and said, "We need people to go to mortars." It was different divisions, you know, like plumbers, pipe fitters, carpenters. Everybody's on the job, but everybody does a different job. You had machine guns and riflemen and mortarmen, flamethrowers and tanks and all like that. But they came by and said, "We need 3 people for mortars. You, and you go to the mortar section." So I went from humping is a term for carrying gear, up and down the hills. And I went from carrying machine gun ammo to carrying mortar ammo. There was 8 of them. They weighed 4 pounds apiece, and they were strapped to a pack board, a hard surface pack board, and you slipped it on top. And then you took your pack, which had your personal gear, an entrenching tool, poncho, socks, sea rations, and any other comfort items, and you strapped it to the outside of that pack. So you had a flak jacket that weighed, a Korean War vintage flak jacket that weighed about 20 pounds. It had hard plates in it. A helmet weighed 4 pounds. A cartridge belt with 3 canteens and 4 magazines on it. And this pack board weighed about 60 pounds. So you're carrying all this gear in moderately 100-degree temperature. And you're beating the bushes. We stepped out in elephant grass one time that was almost as tall as this room. It was over 6 feet tall, and it was like standing in a sauna. And we stayed there for a while the point guy looked out things, and we moved on through there. But it was just like standing in a sauna. And everywhere you touched it, it was like tall Johnson grass. And everywhere you touched it, it would cut you. And some of the things there that we would been wet so long and wading through all the rice paddies, we got trench foot and jungle rot. Jungle rot, I had a piece on my elbow that started out as a sore, the size of an eraser. And when it finally healed up, it was big as a silver dollar. And it was just a constant scab. It peeled off. And you can't imagine the dirt, the filth, and the wading through a rice paddy that's waist deep in water. And when you come out, you drop your pants and you check for leeches. And somebody that's got a cigarette will take and touch a leech and make him turn loose of you. And he leaves a little blood ring about that big around. A leech is a large worm about that long, big as your thumb, that lives in the water. They're blood-sucking leeches. And every time we crossed the rice paddy, somebody had them.
Yeah. What are some of your locations of military service?
Well, went to San Diego for boot camp. Went to Camp Pendleton just north of San Diego for infantry training regiment. And then we had the basic leave. Went back to Camp Pendleton for staging to get ready to go to Vietnam. Went to Vietnam for 13 months, 6 days and whatever hours. Not that I counted, you know. And when we came back, we were called short timers because I had 6 months left to do before I got out. And they sent us to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And it was just busy work. I was in a weapons platoon there. I had 30 days KP. We worked guard duty. We trained some Seabees on how to shoot an 81mm mortar. And they were on their way to Vietnam. We trained them, and some Einstein got the theory that we were going to have a mortar on a riverine type boat. So they took two of these large fishing john boats, kind of like they have today, snagging down on the river. Have you seen them? Just a flat bottom john boat.
Yeah.
Okay. They took two sheets of plywood and laid on top of them in the middle. Okay. Strapped them together and took a mortar, weighs 60 to 80 pounds, and set it on top of this plywood. And they were going to run up and down the river and fire mortar rounds at the enemy. Well, like I said, the typical brainstorm, practical application did not work out well at all. One night, when we got attacked here at Jolene, we were firing return fire at the enemy because some of these guys were within 4,000 yards of us. Some of them were closer than that. And I got called out of the bunker while this stuff is coming in. And it's pretty heavy. And they said, well, we've got infantry in front of 3rd Platoon, and we need some illumination over there. So I got out of the bunker. We had a gun pit set up, 2 rows of sandbags. We were protected from light mortars and a little bit of infantry fire, but nothing heavy. And I crawled out of the bunker into the gun pit, and I'm firing illumination in front of 3rd Platoon, and this stuff is coming in, and it's a little bit frightening, a little bit.
For sure.
And after a while, they said, well, we've got movement out in front of 2nd Platoon. We need some fire out in front of them. So we're out there dropping mortar rounds down the tube, and it's going outside the perimeter, and we get a dud. Now, some of our ammunition was made in 1946, the year I was born, and consequently, only about 50 to 80% of the ammunition would fire. And when you drop one of these things, now imagine this with about a foot-long extension full of explosives in here. It's got a safety wire on the fuse, and you take this thumb and flip the safety wire. It's like a large paper clip. You flip it so it pops off, and it explodes when the point makes contact. Okay, and you drop it down the tube. It's like a 3-foot piece of pipe, and you drop it down, and when this shotgun shell hits the fixed firing pin, it detonates and blows it out. Okay, what do you do when one of them doesn't go off?
Run.
What do you do? How do you clear it? You take these 2 thumbs. You got anything? Okay, this is a good example. Say this is a mortar tube. You drop the round down, it doesn't detonate. The A gunner takes these 2 thumbs and hooks it over the sides of the tube, and the gunner takes and tilts. And this is a live round and could cook off at any time. Tilts it up and shakes it a little bit, and it eases down the tube, and you grab it and gingerly pull it out, put the safety wire back on it, and throw it just as far up from the gun pit as you can.
Did that happen a lot?
Quite a bit, especially that night, because we fired a lot that night. And we had one there at Camp Lejeune with the 81s that did the same thing. And the gunner is picking the base plate up. Base plate's a great big thing, keep it from going in the ground. He picked it up about shoulder height, and about that time it cooked off and went in direct line of fire out that way. It broke both thumbs on the guy that had him hooked over the muzzle. So it does happen.
Yeah. Do you have any medals or service awards?
Yeah, they're all on my DD-214. I don't have any personal medals. You mean for heroism? No.
Whatever.
Okay. I got the National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal with 1 star, Vietnam Campaign Medal with device 1960 through, and the Expert Rifleman Badge in 14. And that's about the only awards I had, and everybody in our outfit got that.
All right, that's all I got. Anything else? What was your highest rank?
Corporal E4. I graduated from boot camp in the top 10%, and in the Marine Corps you start out as private, just plain private. Then you made private first class, and I made private PFC out of boot camp, and then after staging I made Lance Corporal. It's 1 stripe with crossed rifles underneath it, and then I made Corporal, I guess, after I'd been in Vietnam for about 6 months or so. And that's the way I got out. They said, we'll make you sergeant if you'll re-enlist. I said, that's okay. In 2 weeks, I'll make myself a General 01 because I'll be out.
Yeah.
The important thing was to get out intact with all extremities, if possible. It's terrible to see a guy that stepped on a mine and lost body parts. Somebody that, we had this one guy, that he was the nicest guy in the world from engineers. We had been making heavy contact. Now, these NVA, where we were up north, they had radios and artillery over on the north side of the river in North Vietnam, just like we did. And we had made contact with this group of NVA and called tanks to help sweep a trench line. It was low rolling hills and had hedgerows and trench lines, kind of like you've seen pictures of Normandy, where they had the hedgerow fights. Well, it was similar to that, and there was a big ditch on each side, on one side of the hedgerow or the other. And they were in there, and this tank came up, and with this machine gun and armor, and he swept them out of there, and we were able to get back to our fire base. And on the way back, they started dropping artillery on top of us. And this one engineer, nicest guy in the world, I mean, you really enjoyed being around him. And he took a direct hit. There wasn't much left of him. And like the nephew says, life is a matter of inches and seconds. 2 seconds sooner, been fine. 2 seconds later, he would have been fine. But it just so happened he was at the right time at the wrong place. Just think about it. You may have been driving somewhere and somebody gets T-boned with the car behind you. If you'd been 2 seconds earlier, 2 seconds later.
All right.
That's one of the important things I want to press on you and anybody else, that seconds and inches. When I was in a firefight one day, there was a round that came real close to me. You could hear it breaking wind right next to you. And it gives you a little different perspective on things, because, you know, another 2 foot, I'd had a bad day. We were making contact one day, same incident, and we had this in the hedgerow, and had this rifleman that he raised up, looked through the hedgerow, and there's this NVA raised up looking right at him. And our guy was just a little bit quicker on the trigger, and he hosed him down as he swung across him, and this NVA got one shot off. It hit him right here on the cheekbone and deflected. Coleman put one bandage on him right here, and that's how close it was.
Yeah.
That's how close it was. We had this other guy, first real firefight I was in, attacking this Ville, and we had this guy that took a round in the helmet, and it went between the helmet and the liner and came around and hit this ear. That's close, huh?
Yeah, very.
We had this other guy named Dorio. He was an Italian guy from the East Coast, nice guy. He came up to be medevaced, and he had 3 holes right here. And it wasn't a sucking chest wound. Usually if you get a hole in the lungs, it's what we call a sucking chest wound. And you have to cover it with a cellophane object of some sort to keep it from leaking air, because you can't breathe. And he wasn't a sucking chest wound. They sent him out to the rear to medevac. In 3 weeks he was back with the company. You talk about luck. That's luck. I stepped on a booby trap. It went off. I got powder burns on both legs, and the guy behind me caught shrapnel in the face, and he went stateside. He'd been in country 2 weeks. He goes back stateside. It broke a blood vessel on one eye, and they had to send him to some special surgeon to get it fixed. And I got to hump my gear and his with powder burns. But because it wasn't a severe wound, I didn't get a Purple Heart.
I don't know how that.
You know, I showed you that one picture, that tent we had set up, and my fingers poking through.
Yeah.
That's where a piece of shrapnel went through it.
Right. Very, very close.
Well, like that week left to do, and that rocket round hits the outhouse. That wasn't from me to that desk right there, from me. And I'm short. You get nervous when you get short. You want to really be careful. It would be a tragedy to be there 12 months and 29 days and die after all the bad things you had to go
Yeah.
through.
Everything you experienced.
Yes. Notice I cleaned that up.
Oh, yeah.
But this is my story basically, and if you want to, if she wants to show this album, you're welcome to it. I want to display the map here for the camera. Now, this is a map of North and South Vietnam. Saigon is here. Da Nang is here. That was one of the major air bases that we came in on commercial air flight.
Yeah, you can see.
Okay, on commercial air flight. And this is the Song Ben Hoi River that separates North and South Vietnam. This is Jo Lin right here where that artillery attack happened. This is Con Tien, which is called Hill of Angels. And the McNamara line went from Jo Lin to Con Tien, and that's the part that will not grow grass till today. And I've been on this road. This is Highway 1, went all the way up down Vietnam. And I've been on this road right here on the plateau, could look across the Song Ben Hoi River and see the red flag on the far side. And up there where we were, there weren't VC with black pajamas and a rusty carbine. These guys had their act together. They had AK-47s, they had corpsmen, they had plasma, they had communications, uniforms, the little pith helmet, pretty determined people. I've got a picture in here that I was twice as close to Hanoi as I was to Saigon. Not a good feeling.
No.
And when we got hit with this heavy artillery, I just knew that all the NVA in the world were coming in behind them. They didn't, but I was prepared for it. And do you want to go through the book? Okay.
Well, I thank you so much for coming.
Well, you're most welcome.
Everyone who sees this will be very grateful
Well,
and indebted to you for seeing this.
I hope that I have explained some of our situation. I don't know if I did a very good job or not.
Oh, you did great.
But it's an experience that gives you an appreciation for life
Yes.
that those that haven't been can never have.
Yeah.
Like I say, sleeping in, the hardest thing that I had to get used to was sleeping with it raining on my face. And the wife said that for years when I would be asleep in the bed, my hand would be up over my head like this. And she said, "Why do you sleep that way?" And I said, "Well, I got used to, all we had was a poncho, and you'd roll up in a poncho, lay down in a mud hole and go to sleep." And I did this to keep the poncho off my face while I was trying to sleep. Old habits carry over for a long time.
Yeah.
Just like tucking your shoelaces into your boot. Most people just let them flop.
Yeah.
Well, mine are flopping, but usually when I'm wearing boots, I tuck the laces in on each side.
Yeah.
Old habits die hard. Guys made fun of me talking about losing your night vision when I was first hired out for the railroad, and they thought it was funny because they didn't know what night vision was, and I had to explain it to them. And it's little things you pick up that may help you later in life. I have a picture in my album of Lieutenant General Lew Walt and this Congressman Larry, I don't remember his last name, but he went down in KOL 007. The Russians shot him down off the coast of Korea. And there was a big to-do about how that it was not accidental downing. The congressman had something on him, and for whatever politics they were playing, and they shot him down, killed him. The whole plane. They killed the whole plane to get one man. But Lew Walt was a great man. When we were up there on the outer bounds of nowhere, he came up to inspect the positions and all like that. And it was good to see that the upper echelon was there with us.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, "Go get them, man," it was, "Hey, I'm looking around here checking you guys."
Yeah.
I guess that's all I got to say.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. You're most welcome. If I can gather up all my stuff here.